The early morning sun had barely pierced the horizon when Captain Olivia Sanders strode onto the tarmac at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Her black leather heels clicked against the concrete, a metronome marking the tension she carried like armor. She had flown thousands of hours in her career, jets, commercial aircraft, private charters. But this flight, Flight 612 to New York, already felt different. Something in the air was heavy, charged. Her sharp eyes scanned the crew assembling near the jet, noting every flicker of nervous energy, every uneasy glance. First Officer Jasmine Monroe approached the aircraft from the opposite side, her posture straight, her stride purposeful. At 28, she was one of the youngest black pilots Delta had ever hired. Her uniform was crisp, insignia perfectly aligned, her hair tucked neatly under her cap with only a single braid peeking out. She carried herself with quiet authority, and yet she could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing down like a physical force. Whispers traveled ahead of her steps, low, almost inaudible, but Jasmine heard them. "She's too young, too inexperienced. Does she even belong here?" The veteran crew members gathered near the open cockpit avoided her gaze. Some shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy looks. Olivia noticed, too. Her jaw tightened as she studied the young co-pilot, already sensing a tension she knew she would have to confront. The moment Jasmine reached the cockpit door, Olivia's instincts went on high alert. She had seen difficult situations before, but there was a different energy here, a quiet defiance that demanded recognition. From behind the curtain, a flight attendant whispered almost nervously, "Captain, I think she's fully qualified, but you know how pilots talk." Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. She had heard the rumors about Jasmine, about her accolades, her combat training, and how she had risen through the ranks faster than anyone expected. "Not on my watch," Olivia thought. "Good morning, Captain Sanders," Jasmine said, her voice steady, carrying both warmth and command. "I'm First Officer Monroe. I'll be handling the co-pilot duties for this flight. Let's get this plane in the air safely." Olivia's eyes narrowed. She exhaled slowly, masking a rush of irritation. "I've been flying longer than you've been alive," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to anyone else. The words hung in the air like smoke, sharp and acrid. Her hands itched to grab the controls, to assert her authority before this rookie had a chance to demonstrate hers. A few minutes later, the rest of the crew began boarding. Flight attendants, some weary from early shifts, moved along the aisle, checking tickets and assisting passengers. Among them, subtle glances were exchanged toward Jasmine. There was curiosity, yes, but also skepticism. Some had already made up their minds about the young black co-pilot, whispering quietly about whether she could handle a flight of this magnitude. Passengers streamed onto the plane, oblivious to the storm brewing in the cockpit. Families with small children, couples clutching coffee cups, business travelers absorbed in their devices, all unaware of the tension seething just ahead. Jasmine continued her pre-flight checklist, methodical, calm, professional. Her fingers danced over the switches and displays, every movement precise, almost elegant. She knew that the eyes of the world, or at least of the crew, were on her. Every action mattered. Meanwhile, Olivia lingered near the cockpit doorway, her arms crossed. Her mind raced through every scenario she could imagine: mechanical failures, emergency situations, or this very moment spiraling into open conflict. Her pride, honed over decades, bristled at the thought of taking orders from someone so young. And yet she could feel the quiet confidence radiating from Jasmine, a confidence born from training, from discipline, from experience in situations Olivia had never faced. "Captain Sanders, are you ready?" Jasmine asked, her tone even, almost gentle, but carrying an undercurrent of firmness that left no room for argument. Olivia hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. The tarmac buzzed with activity around them, fuel trucks, ground crew, luggage handlers. Yet inside the cockpit, time seemed suspended. The air was thick, almost palpable with anticipation. Then came the moment that made every heartbeat in the crew and cockpit skip a beat. One of the veteran pilots, a man with graying hair and a reputation for blunt honesty, muttered under his breath, loud enough for Jasmine to hear, "I can't fly with her." Not on my flight. Not on my plane." His voice was a knife cutting through the already taut tension. Jasmine froze for a fraction of a second, her hands tightening around her flight bag. She could feel the eyes of the remaining crew on her, bracing for her reaction. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of engines being warmed and the distant chatter of passengers. She knew that one wrong move, one loss of composure could derail her entire career. But she didn't flinch. "Sir," she said, her voice calm but piercing, "I am fully certified to operate this aircraft. I will not compromise safety for prejudice. If you refuse to fly, that is your decision, but it cannot impede this flight." Her words were measured, authoritative, carrying the weight of law, protocol, and moral clarity. Olivia's gaze flickered between Jasmine and the veteran pilot. She felt the electricity in the air, a silent challenge passing between herself and this young co-pilot. A flicker of anger and disbelief crossed her face, but beneath it she recognized something she hadn't seen in years: courage, unshakable and unwavering. Outside, the tarmac continued to hum with life. Passengers in line sensed an unusual energy, glancing toward the open cockpit, feeling something shift, though they couldn't place what. Inside, the tension built like a pressure cooker. Every second stretched, measured, deliberate. Jasmine's mind ran through every scenario she had trained for, every emergency she had prepared for, yet she knew the greatest challenge wasn't the flight itself. It was breaking through prejudice at 30,000 feet. A young flight attendant lingered near the cockpit, biting her lip. "This is something else," she whispered to a colleague. The colleague nodded, eyes wide, sensing that this was a turning point, though they didn't know the extent. Jasmine exhaled slowly. She had faced doubt and discrimination before, but never in a room or cockpit so charged with both history and expectation. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them, steady, clear, unshakable. This was her moment. She wasn't just a co-pilot. She wasn't just a black woman in a sea of skepticism. She was a professional entrusted with lives, and she would not allow bias to compromise her responsibility. Olivia's fingers itched near the controls. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came, only a tight-lipped silence that made the seconds stretch longer, sharper. Jasmine's presence demanded attention, her authority undeniable, though the veteran pilot's murmurs still echoed like a low drumbeat in the cockpit. Finally, the boarding doors closed. Passengers settled into their seats, unaware of the storm behind them, of the tension that could erupt at any second. The plane hummed, waiting, poised on the edge of motion. Jasmine sat in the co-pilot seat, eyes forward, heart steady, prepared for the flight and the battle ahead. Olivia lingered in the cockpit, her silence speaking volumes, a mixture of incredulity, pride, and challenge swirling within her. The engines roared to life. The hum of fuel pumps, the vibration through the floor, the rising crescendo of anticipation. It was time. The moment of truth was approaching. Suspense. Would the flight even take off with this tension, or would the storm in the cockpit explode before the wheels left the ground? The cabin was quiet, but the air inside was electric, thick with unspoken tension. Flight 612's passengers had buckled into their seats, some glancing toward the cockpit curtain, sensing an unusual energy. Jasmine Monroe remained seated in the co-pilot's chair, her hands resting lightly on the controls, though her fingers itched to tighten her grip on the yoke. She could feel every gaze in the room, every heartbeat syncing with hers. Captain Olivia Sanders stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Jasmine. Every muscle in her body radiated authority, but beneath it was a tight coil of disbelief. She had faced difficult co-pilots before, but none like this. Someone young, confident, unshakable, and to her, a challenge she hadn't anticipated. Her pride bristled. She wanted to assert dominance, to reclaim control over the flight, but there was something about Jasmine's calm that made it impossible to intimidate her. A murmur ran through the crew. Flight attendants exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene, support the co-pilot, or shield the captain. The veteran pilot from the tarmac lingered by the cockpit doorway, muttering, "This isn't going to end well." Jasmine didn't flinch. She had been trained for this moment, every nuance, every psychological maneuver, every high-stakes scenario. She understood that flying a plane wasn't just about mechanics. It was about authority, presence, and decisiveness. "Captain Sanders," Jasmine began, her voice steady, carrying the weight of command, "I am fully qualified to operate this aircraft. I will not tolerate refusal based on personal bias. We can either proceed as professionals or escalate this to airline operations immediately." Olivia's lips pressed together tightly, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. "I've flown longer than you've been alive. You may have certifications, but you have no experience in real-world judgment." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Jasmine leaned slightly forward. "Experience is irrelevant if it compromises safety. Our passengers' lives depend on procedure, training, and cooperation, not personal prejudices." Her eyes locked on Olivia's, unwavering, unyielding. For a moment, the cockpit seemed to shrink, every sound outside the plane muffled, leaving only the taut electricity between the two women. A flight attendant stepped hesitantly near the curtain. "Captain, maybe we should call ground control." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying her nerves. "It might be better if operations handles this." Olivia's gaze snapped toward her. "Stay out of this," she hissed, her jaw tight. "This is between us. You have no say here." Her tone was a mixture of command and warning, but it only underscored her isolation. Jasmine exhaled slowly. "Then we proceed as professionals," she said, almost softly, though the authority behind the words carried through the cockpit like a drumbeat. "You can either sit in your seat and operate as co-captain, or you may step aside and let me assume full command." The veteran pilot snorted in disbelief. "You can't just take over." His voice cracked slightly, revealing a flicker of fear beneath his bravado. "You're a rookie." "I am also fully authorized," Jasmine replied. Her voice didn't waver. "And if you refuse to comply, this flight cannot legally depart. That is non-negotiable." A tense silence fell over the cockpit. Olivia's fingers twitched near the throttle, a small but visible display of her frustration. The murmur of the cabin outside had grown, a soft rustling of conversations, some curious, some concerned passengers wondering why the flight attendants kept glancing toward the cockpit. Jasmine ignored it. Every second of hesitation could be used to manipulate, to undermine, or to intimidate. But she had trained for this. She would not break. "Are you seriously going to challenge me in front of the crew?" Olivia asked, voice low but dangerous. "Do you understand who I am?" Jasmine met her gaze without flinching. "I understand exactly who you are, and I also understand what the law and Delta Airlines policy allow. I am authorized to command this aircraft. I will not permit discrimination to impede safety or procedure." The veteran pilot looked like he might argue again, but Jasmine's calm, piercing stare held him in place. She didn't need to shout or threaten. Her presence alone communicated that she was not to be trifled with. Olivia's lips parted, then closed again, a storm of conflicting emotions flashing across her face: anger, disbelief, and beneath it all, a grudging respect. She had never met someone who could stand toe-to-toe with her like this. "Fine," Olivia said finally, her voice tight. "But if something goes wrong, the responsibility is yours." Jasmine nodded, a faint acknowledgement that she had expected resistance. "Responsibility is shared. That is why we follow procedure, communicate, and operate as a team. But I will not compromise on authority or safety." A flight attendant peeked through the cockpit curtain, trembling slightly. "Captain Sanders, maybe you should." Olivia turned toward her sharply. "Enough, do your job." The tension didn't break. It only thickened. Jasmine sat silently, reviewing checklists, preparing the plane for takeoff. She could feel the veteran pilot's eyes on her every movement, skeptical, critical, yet powerless to stop her. Outside, the tarmac buzzed with the usual morning activity: fuel trucks rolling into position, luggage being loaded, ground crews signaling the engines. But inside, it was as if time had slowed. Every breath, every movement, every word carried the weight of history, of race, of authority and of defiance. A young passenger, no older than 19, whispered to her seatmate, "Did you see the pilots? Something's wrong, it's like they're fighting." The seatmate shrugged, too engrossed in their phone to understand the gravity of what was unfolding. Jasmine's mind raced through contingencies: refusal to comply, potential legal escalation, emergency procedures if Olivia actually tried to interfere mid-flight. But she kept her hands steady, her voice calm and her gaze unwavering. She knew this moment could define the rest of her career, or possibly alter airline protocols entirely. Then came the breaking point. Olivia's hand moved toward the controls, almost instinctively, as if to assert her dominance. Jasmine leaned slightly forward. "Captain Sanders," she said firmly, "any attempt to override my authority at this moment will be considered insubordination. I am fully authorized to assume command if necessary. I advise you to step back." Olivia froze, hand hovering midair, eyes wide, chest rising and falling quickly. The tension was palpable, a tangible electricity filling the cockpit. Behind the curtain, a flight attendant swallowed hard, knowing that this confrontation had escalated to the edge of crisis. Jasmine exhaled slowly, letting the moment stretch just enough to communicate control without aggression. "We can do this the right way," she said, voice calm but unwavering. "Or we can escalate it. The choice is yours." For a heartbeat, Olivia's chest heaved. The silence was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the plane's systems and the distant noise of passengers settling in. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver, though inside, her pulse raced. She had navigated storms at 30,000 feet, but this was different. A storm of authority, of pride, of racial tension, all concentrated in one cockpit. Finally, Olivia's shoulders slumped, if only slightly. You really think you can handle this?" she asked, voice a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. Jasmine met her gaze squarely. "I know I can. Let's fly this plane safely together, or not at all." The veteran pilot's jaw tightened, realization dawning. This was not a game. This was not a drill. Jasmine Monroe was fully prepared to take command, and nothing, not history, not bias, not intimidation, would stop her. Suspense. Would Olivia step aside and let Jasmine assert authority, or would the conflict explode, threatening the flight, the crew, and everyone aboard? The passengers streamed onto Flight 612, unaware of the drama brewing just beyond the cockpit curtain. Families lugged overstuffed carry-ons, toddlers whined in the aisles, and business travelers typed furiously on laptops, oblivious to the tension that had already begun to ripple through the cabin. Flight attendants moved like dancers across a crowded stage, guiding passengers to their seats, but their eyes betrayed the unease they felt. Something about this flight felt different, electric, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Jasmine Monroe remained seated in the co-pilot chair, calm, deliberate, checking instruments and reviewing the pre-flight checklist. Every movement was precise, measured, a silent declaration of authority. She could feel the invisible pressure around her, the weight of the veteran pilot's skepticism, the lingering doubt of the cabin crew, the unspoken biases threading through the air. Every crew member had been silently sizing her up, questioning her competence, while passengers sensed something extraordinary but could not yet place it. Captain Olivia Sanders lingered near the cockpit doorway, arms crossed and chest tight. Her jaw clenched as she watched Jasmine. For decades, she had commanded authority effortlessly, but now she found herself in unfamiliar territory, challenged not by incompetence but by quiet mastery and unwavering confidence. Olivia's pride burned, but beneath it was a grudging acknowledgement of Jasmine's capability, a reality she wasn't ready to admit. A flight attendant, Jenna, approached the cockpit nervously. "Captain, maybe you should," she began, her voice faltering. Olivia's sharp gaze cut her off instantly. "Stay out of it," Olivia snapped, voice low and dangerous. Jenna retreated, flustered, muttering under her breath, I don't know what to do." The murmurs from the cabin grew. Passengers whispered, some craning their necks toward the cockpit. "Did you see the pilots?" A man in 7B whispered to his wife. "Something off." She nodded slowly, sensing the tension but unsure of its source. Phones appeared discreetly in hands. Some passengers began filming, instinctively drawn to what they sensed was a historic moment in the making. Meanwhile, Olivia's co-pilot seat remained empty. She refused to sit beside Jasmine, her pride an unyielding barrier. She leaned against the cockpit wall, eyes darting between instruments, crew, and the young co-pilot who had already claimed an invisible authority. Jasmine's fingers danced over the switches with controlled precision, setting the plane's systems for takeoff, her confidence radiating like a beacon through the cockpit. The veteran pilot's voice muttered again, low but audible, "This is insane, you can't just..." Jasmine's calm, sharp gaze pinned him to the spot. "I am fully authorized. Any refusal to follow protocol will be considered insubordination. I suggest you focus on your assigned tasks and comply." The words had the effect of a whip crack in the stillness. Crew members froze. Flight attendants shifted uneasily, unsure whether to intervene or comply. Some subtly moved closer to the cockpit, curious, anxious, afraid that this situation might spiral out of control. Every second stretched longer, the tension thickening, tangling with the hum of the plane's systems and the distant sounds of luggage carts and ground crew outside. Passengers continued to board, oblivious to the confrontation but sensing an undercurrent of drama. A businesswoman in 14C whispered to her colleague, "Something happening. Look at them, the pilots, it's like they're arguing." Another passenger glanced at the cockpit curtain, frowning. The atmosphere was a mix of routine travel and suspense, every ordinary sound amplified by the silent conflict behind the curtain. The veteran pilot, finally realizing the seriousness of Jasmine's authority, attempted a quiet mutiny. "You can't just," he began, but Jasmine's tone cut through the cabin like steel. "Any attempt to interfere with this flight or compromise safety will result in immediate removal and disciplinary action. That is your only warning," she said. Her words left no room for negotiation. The pilot's lips pressed together, and he stepped back, a flicker of unease in his eyes. Olivia Sanders' chest heaved as she processed the reality of the moment. She had always been in control. She had always commanded respect. But now, authority was slipping through her fingers, claimed by someone younger, someone she had underestimated. The humiliation stung, burning beneath the surface, but she masked it behind a tight-lipped stare. A flight attendant approached cautiously, whispering, "Captain, passengers are noticing the tension. Some are filming." Olivia's eyes narrowed. She waved the comment off, but Jasmine, ever composed, nodded slightly. "Let them observe," she said quietly, almost to herself. "We are handling this professionally." The boarding process continued, though the tension had already begun to disrupt the usual rhythm. Carry-on luggage slammed into overhead bins, a child's toy clattered to the floor, and a passenger's suitcase rolled backward down the aisle. Flight attendants responded automatically, but their movements carried a nervous edge, their eyes flicking toward the cockpit. Finally, the last passenger boarded, and the cabin doors closed. Jasmine performed a silent inspection, reviewing the checklist one final time before takeoff. Every movement was deliberate, precise, a display of calm authority that contrasted sharply with Olivia's tense, frustrated stance. The veteran pilot had withdrawn to the back, muttering under his breath, realizing that Jasmine's competence and unshakable confidence had shifted the balance of power. "Pre-flight checks complete," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "Cabin secure, passengers seated, we are ready for pushback." The hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin, vibrating through the floor and walls. Passengers fidgeted, sensing anticipation. Flight attendants whispered to each other, wide-eyed, watching the unfolding drama with a mixture of awe and anxiety. Olivia finally spoke, her tone controlled but tight. "You're in charge, Monroe, don't screw this up." Her words were laced with frustration, and yet beneath the anger was the faintest trace of respect. Jasmine's lips curved in a small, controlled smile. She didn't respond, letting the silence and her composed demeanor speak volumes. The pushback began. Ground crew guided the aircraft away from the gate, signals flashing. Jasmine's hands rested lightly on the yoke, eyes scanning instruments, heart steady but pulse quickened. Every second, every movement, every decision mattered. She felt the tension radiating from the crew, from Olivia, from the passengers, but she didn't waver. She had trained for this. She had prepared for this, and she would not falter. Outside, the sun was higher, casting sharp light on the fuselage, glinting off the wings. Passengers glanced out the windows, unaware that history was unfolding inside the cockpit. Jasmine could feel the weight of expectations pressing down, a tangible force, but it strengthened her resolve rather than weakening it. She was not just flying the plane. She was asserting authority, challenging prejudice, and proving competence in real time. As the engines roared louder, ready for takeoff, the veteran pilot muttered once more, a defeated edge in his voice. I can't believe this." Olivia's fists clenched at her sides. She was forced to watch, to follow protocol, to acknowledge, if only internally, that Jasmine had earned the authority she now wielded. The flight attendants exchanged glances, understanding that whatever happened next would define not just this flight, but the careers, reputations, and legacies of everyone involved. Jasmine leaned slightly forward, performing the final checks. "Cabin secure. Clearance obtained. We are ready for departure," she said, voice calm, steady, resolute. Her gaze swept the cockpit, taking in the tension, the doubt, the fear, and the grudging respect. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. Engines thrummed, tires rolling against the tarmac. The passengers, oblivious to the full scale of what had transpired, shifted in their seats, some gripping armrests instinctively, some still filming with phones. Jasmine's eyes flicked to Olivia one last time before takeoff. The moment hung suspended in the cockpit, taut with anticipation. This was the tipping point. 1 second, one decision, one movement would define the next chapter. Suspense. Could Flight 612 take off safely amid unresolved tension? Or would the storm in the cockpit erupt before the plane even left the ground? The plane had taxied halfway down the runway when the tension inside the cockpit reached a breaking point. Jasmine Monroe's eyes remained locked on the instrument panel, scanning gauges and indicators with methodical precision, but she could feel the weight of every heartbeat in the room, the stubborn defiance of Captain Olivia Sanders, the anxious glances of the veteran pilot, and the nervous curiosity of the flight attendants who lingered at the edge of the cockpit. Every second stretched, thick with anticipation, every breath a reminder that one misstep could escalate the situation beyond control. Olivia's hands hovered near the throttle, twitching slightly, as if she were ready to assert herself at the first perceived weakness. "I've been flying longer than anyone here," she muttered, more to herself than to Jasmine. "I know this plane. I know these procedures. I will not be undermined." Jasmine turned slightly, her gaze piercing. Calm, controlled, yet filled with quiet authority, she spoke with a firmness that left no room for argument. "Captain Sanders, this is no longer about experience alone. This is about safety, authority, and compliance with airline policy. You are ordered to either fly this aircraft as co-captain or step aside immediately." The veteran pilot stiffened. "You can't just," he started, but Jasmine's eyes met his with a sharp, unwavering stare. "I can," she interrupted, voice low and unyielding. "I am fully authorized. Your refusal to comply will be documented as insubordination. I advise you to focus on your assigned duties or step aside. The choice is yours." Olivia's jaw tightened. The storm of emotions in her chest, anger, pride, disbelief, and an unexpected flash of respect, clashed violently. She had never been challenged like this, never faced someone so young and yet so completely unshakable. Her fingers flexed near the throttle, a subtle tremor betraying the inner conflict she fought to conceal. A flight attendant peeked through the curtain, whispering nervously, "Captain, maybe we should get operations involved." Jasmine shook her head imperceptibly, signaling for patience. She knew that involving airline management could escalate the situation, but also that time was running out. Passengers were seated, engines were humming, and Flight 612 was poised for takeoff. The last thing she needed was hesitation. "Captain Sanders," Jasmine continued, calm yet firm, "any attempt to interfere or override my authority during pre-flight checks or takeoff will be considered insubordination under Delta Airlines policy. I am giving you one final opportunity to comply." The words landed like a shockwave. Olivia's eyes flicked toward the veteran pilot, who now looked stricken, uncertain, caught between loyalty to the veteran captain and the undeniable authority Jasmine radiated. The flight attendants exchanged anxious glances, sensing that this confrontation was no longer a disagreement. It was a defining moment. Olivia inhaled sharply, her pride bristling like live wire beneath her skin. "Do you really think you can?" she began, but Jasmine's voice cut through the cockpit like a scalpel. "Yes, Captain Sanders. I am ready to assume full command if necessary. This is not a threat, it is a responsibility, one that I will not shirk. Your decision will determine the next course of action. Comply or step aside." The veteran pilot's face went pale. He muttered under his breath, a crack of disbelief in his voice. "This can't be real, she's just a kid." "She's a professional," Jasmine said quietly, though firmly, without looking away from the instruments. "And she's right." Olivia froze, her chest heaving. She could feel the magnitude of what was unfolding. This wasn't about ego or seniority anymore. It was about accountability, leadership, and authority. One wrong move could result in legal repercussions, public humiliation, or even endanger the flight. And yet her pride bristled, screaming at her to resist, to assert dominance, to reclaim control. Jasmine exhaled slowly, deliberately, allowing the tension to stretch just long enough to communicate her authority without aggression. Every muscle in her body radiated calm strength. She had trained for this. She had studied human behavior, emergency protocols, and leadership under pressure. This moment was more than a flight. It was a test of courage, resolve, and the ability to enforce justice in a system resistant to change. "Captain Sanders," she said again, voice measured, unwavering, "I will proceed with takeoff in 5 minutes. If you do not comply, operations will be notified immediately, and authority will be formally transferred to me. This is your final opportunity." The cabin was tense. Passengers, though largely unaware of the full scope, could feel the energy shifting. Flight attendants exchanged wide-eyed glances, whispering quietly about what might happen if this confrontation escalated mid-flight. Phones were discreetly raised, some already recording, though few could imagine the historic significance of what was occurring. Olivia's hands clenched at her sides, knuckles white. Her mind raced through every scenario: compliance, defiance, confrontation, removal, public scandal. Pride warred with responsibility. She wanted to assert control, to prove her experience mattered, but deep down she knew she was facing a force greater than any personal bias: competence, authority, and courage embodied in Jasmine Monroe. Finally, Olivia's shoulders sagged slightly, though her jaw remained tight. She glanced at the veteran pilot, whose expression mirrored a mixture of awe and defeat. The remaining crew seemed frozen, unsure of what would happen next. Every second stretched unbearably long. Jasmine's calm, confident presence dominated the cockpit, radiating control without shouting, without threats, without fear. Jasmine took a final deep breath, letting the hum of the engines and the vibrations of the plane anchor her focus. "Captain Sanders," she said once more, voice clear and unwavering, "either comply and take your seat, or step aside and allow me to assume full command. Any attempt to obstruct will result in immediate removal." Olivia's eyes narrowed, the fight between ego and reason waging inside her. She could feel the weight of history pressing down, every glance of the passengers, crew, and even airline management watching, evaluating, judging. And yet she knew, if she refused, consequences would follow. If she complied, she would have to swallow decades of pride and allow a young black woman to assert authority in a way she had never expected. The silence was deafening, broken only by the low hum of engines and the distant rustle of cabin activity. Jasmine's gaze never wavered. Her hands hovered near the controls, poised, steady, ready to take full command if necessary. The cockpit had become a crucible of power, tension, and history, a moment where authority, justice, and courage collided. Finally, Olivia exhaled sharply, a reluctant concession. "Fine," she muttered, voice tight. "Do what you have to do." Jasmine's lips curved into a small, controlled smile, a mixture of relief and focus. She had won the battle of authority, but she knew the real test was only beginning. The crew remained tense, the passengers unaware, the runway ahead waiting. She had asserted control, but Flight 612 still had to leave the ground safely, and the storm inside the cabin and cockpit had yet to fully settle. The engines roared louder as the plane prepared to taxi. Jasmine's hands rested lightly on the yoke. She performed final checks, her calm precision radiating authority. Olivia remained in the cockpit, silent, a complex mix of grudging respect and simmering pride simmering beneath her exterior. The veteran pilot, still frozen near the rear of the cockpit, could only watch in disbelief, realizing that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Suspense. Would Flight 612 take off safely with this fragile truce, or would lingering tension in the cockpit erupt midair, endangering everyone aboard? The cockpit hummed with anticipation as Flight 612 edged toward the runway. Jasmine Monroe's fingers rested lightly on the yoke, poised but unshakable. The pre-flight checklist had been completed flawlessly, systems checked, fuel levels confirmed, and safety protocols verified. But the true challenge had only just begun, enforcing authority over a crew still caught in disbelief, confusion, and in some cases, defiance. Captain Olivia Sanders, now reluctantly seated in the co-pilot chair, refused to meet Jasmine's gaze. Her arms were crossed tightly, her jaw rigid, a storm of pride and frustration churning beneath the surface. Every muscle in her body radiated tension. She had never been overridden in decades of flying, and yet here she was, subordinated by someone decades younger, someone she had once deemed inexperienced. The reality cut deep, but it was undeniable. Jasmine had earned her authority. The veteran pilot, standing near the back of the cockpit, muttered quietly under his breath. "I can't believe this." He shook his head, eyes darting toward Jasmine, uncertain whether to comply, argue, or retreat. The flight attendants lingered nearby, silent observers to the historic assertion of control. Whispers moved through the crew like ripples in water, each one a question of loyalty, respect, and obedience. Jasmine exhaled slowly, letting the tension settle just enough to assert calm dominance. "All crew members," she said firmly, her voice carrying over the hum of the engines, "please report to the cockpit immediately for instructions. This is a formal directive. Your compliance is mandatory." A flight attendant hesitated at the threshold of the cockpit. Captain Monroe, the rest of the crew, they might not." "Step inside," Jasmine said, voice unwavering. "Now." One by one, the crew approached, hesitating, eyes wide with disbelief. Flight attendants, ground support staff who had boarded late, and the veteran pilot all found themselves drawn to the cockpit like moths to a flame. Jasmine's calm authority left no room for argument. Her presence alone communicated power. Each crew member understood, at some level, that this young woman had shifted the balance irreversibly. "Captain Sanders," Jasmine continued, "your refusal to comply earlier has already been noted. Any further attempts to interfere with this flight or the crew's responsibilities will be considered insubordination. All decisions from this point forward fall under my command." Olivia's chest heaved. She had trained for decades to handle high-pressure situations, but nothing had prepared her for the unflinching resolve radiating from Jasmine. Pride warred with reason, but somewhere deep inside, Olivia recognized a hard truth. The plane was in competent hands. The passengers' lives were not at risk under Jasmine's command, and resisting her authority now could jeopardize both safety and career. The veteran pilot cleared his throat, attempting to regain composure. "And what about the rest of the crew?" he asked, voice tinged with disbelief. Jasmine's eyes swept over him, cold and commanding. "All crew members who refuse to comply with operational directives are subject to immediate removal and disciplinary action. The airline will be notified. Compliance is not optional." A tense silence fell. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded reluctantly, others shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had little choice but to obey. The weight of Jasmine's authority pressed down like a physical force, tangible, undeniable. The first flight attendant stepped forward, hesitating. "Captain, what exactly do you want us to do?" Jasmine's gaze softened slightly, though her authority remained firm. "Follow protocol, prepare the cabin for takeoff, ensure all passengers are seated and secured, report any irregularities immediately. This is not personal, this is operational. Safety and compliance come first." As the instructions were absorbed, a subtle transformation began to occur. Crew members who had initially been skeptical or resistant now moved with cautious efficiency, executing their tasks under Jasmine's clear, authoritative guidance. Passengers continued to murmur, some sensing the unusual energy, others oblivious to the historic power shift unfolding just beyond the cockpit. Olivia's hands flexed on her lap. She watched the crew respond to Jasmine's command, a mixture of pride and resentment swirling inside her. She had trained countless pilots, led teams through emergencies, and flown through turbulence that would make lesser aviators falter. And yet, here she was, observing a 28-year-old co-pilot assume control with a calm precision that demanded obedience and respect. The veteran pilot muttered again, almost under his breath, She's actually doing it." Jasmine's gaze flicked toward him, and for a brief moment the air seemed to crackle. "Yes," she said evenly, "and if you do not comply, I will have no choice but to involve operations immediately. This is not a threat, this is procedure." Even Olivia recognized the gravity of the statement. The authority had shifted, and resistance now carried real consequences. The flight attendants moved like clockwork, checking seatbelts, securing overhead bins, and scanning passengers for compliance. Their movements were precise, professional, yet tinged with the nervous awe of witnessing an unprecedented demonstration of authority. Jasmine exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of the cabin settle. She had asserted control, but she knew the true test was yet to come, ensuring that every member of the crew followed her instructions without hesitation during takeoff. One misstep, one act of defiance, and the delicate balance of authority could collapse. The plane reached the end of the taxiway. Jasmine's hands hovered over the yoke, instruments glowing under the soft cabin lights. Engines roared louder, vibrating through the fuselage, signaling readiness. She felt the weight of the flight pressing down, the eyes of every crew member, every passenger, and even the invisible gaze of history upon her. "Cabin secured," Jasmine announced, voice calm but commanding. "Passengers seated, clearance obtained, we are ready for takeoff." The crew executed the final checks, moving efficiently under her guidance. The transformation was complete. Skepticism had been replaced by compliance, hesitation replaced by precision. The authority that had been questioned minutes earlier now radiated unmistakably, undeniable, and complete. Olivia exhaled quietly, a reluctant acknowledgement passing through her eyes. She still refused to speak, but her posture softened, a subtle nod to the competence and courage of her co-pilot. Pride warred with acceptance, but she could no longer deny the reality. Jasmine Monroe had taken command, and the flight was ready to move forward under her authority. As the plane began to accelerate down the runway, the hum of engines vibrating through the cabin, the weight of history pressed on Jasmine's shoulders. She had navigated prejudice, defiance, and tension, asserting authority in a way few could have imagined. The power had shifted irrevocably, but the flight itself remained the ultimate test. She could enforce control on the ground, but could she ensure safety, compliance, and professionalism at 30,000 feet with a crew still adjusting to the new order? Suspense. Could Jasmine maintain control under immense pressure, with a crew still skeptical and a veteran captain simmering beside her, as Flight 612 roared down the runway toward takeoff? The engines roared as Flight 612 lifted off the runway, tires leaving the tarmac with a surge of power that reverberated through every passenger seat. Jasmine Monroe's hands gripped the yoke with controlled precision, her eyes scanning the instrument panel, each gauge a pulse in the heartbeat of the aircraft. The plane climbed steadily, its trajectory perfect, a testament to her skill and training. But the tension in the cabin and cockpit had not dissipated. It had shifted, and now it pressed down on every crew member like an invisible weight. Captain Olivia Sanders sat rigidly beside her, silent but taut, jaw clenched as she stared straight ahead. Pride and disbelief warred within her. She had been bested, overpowered by a younger black co-pilot who had commanded authority in a way Olivia had never anticipated. She wanted to argue, to reclaim control, but she knew that any act of defiance now could jeopardize her career, the safety of the passengers, and the plane itself. The veteran pilot standing near the rear of the cockpit swallowed hard. I can't believe this," he muttered, voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Jasmine didn't respond immediately. She was aware of every eye, every breath, every heartbeat in the room. She had reached the moment she had trained for, enforcing authority where hesitation and bias had once ruled. "Attention, all crew," Jasmine's voice cut through the cockpit intercom, calm but authoritative. "This is Captain Monroe speaking. Due to recent insubordination and refusal to comply with operational protocol, your employment on this flight is terminated, effective immediately." A stunned silence fell over the cabin. Passengers glanced toward the cockpit curtain, some curious, some alarmed. A young woman in 14B whispered to her companion, "Did she just say they're fired?" The companion's jaw dropped. Phones appeared in hands, discreetly recording the announcement, but even they could not capture the full weight of the moment. Inside the cockpit, Olivia's eyes widened. You can't do that," she said, voice tight, disbelief coloring every syllable. "Yes, I can," Jasmine replied evenly. "And I am. Any further refusal to comply with operational directives will be met with immediate escalation. You have been formally relieved of duty on this flight." The veteran pilot's face went pale. "Are you serious?" His voice cracked slightly. Jasmine's gaze didn't waver. "Completely serious. Please gather your personal effects. Security will escort you from the aircraft upon landing." One by one, the crew outside the cockpit froze. Flight attendants who had once whispered behind the curtain now stood paralyzed, unsure how to process what was happening. Some glanced at passengers nervously, others stared at Jasmine with wide eyes, a mix of fear, awe, and disbelief. This was unprecedented, even for those accustomed to the strict hierarchies of aviation. Olivia's hands clenched on her lap, knuckles white, but her body remained still. She had trained countless pilots, led crews through emergencies, and commanded flights in turbulence that could have unmoored lesser aviators. And yet here she was, overpowered not by incompetence but by authority, skill, and resolve. Her pride screamed to resist, but reason whispered that any rebellion now could destroy everything she had built. Jasmine exhaled slowly, letting the weight of her words and actions settle. "This is not personal," she said softly, though her tone carried unmistakable authority. "This is operational. Safety and compliance take precedence over hierarchy and ego. Any further disruption will be escalated immediately to airline management." A young flight attendant, eyes wide, whispered to a colleague, "Did she just fire the entire crew?" The colleague nodded, equally stunned. Some passengers began murmuring, trying to piece together the reality of the situation, while others simply watched in stunned silence. In the cockpit, Jasmine maintained her composure, hands steady on the yoke, scanning instruments and reviewing systems with exacting care. She had trained for moments like this, high-pressure environments where authority, skill, and decisiveness were the only tools capable of preventing disaster. The plane was her domain now. Every decision, every command flowed through her with precision. Olivia shifted slightly, jaw tight, silent but simmering with the tension of defeat. She had been bested, overpowered, and humbled. Every lesson she had taught, every expectation she had held about authority and control had been challenged and upended. Yet Jasmine did not gloat, did not show malice. She acted with calm efficiency, a demonstration of professional power that left no room for argument or ego. The veteran pilot muttered again, voice trembling. I've never seen anything like this, a Copilot, firing the entire crew. Yes, Jasmine replied, calm, unwavering. And it is being done in accordance with operational policy and airline safety protocol. Any further noncompliance will result in formal reporting and immediate removal from service. Flight attendants began moving with measured precision, following her instructions to secure the cabin, check passenger safety, and verify compliance. They had initially been skeptical, some openly resistant, but the undeniable authority emanating from Jasmine left no room for hesitation. Each movement, each decision, reinforced the new chain of command. Passengers continued to whisper and murmur among themselves. Some were filming, others were wide-eyed in shock. They had no idea they were witnessing an unprecedented assertion of authority mid-flight, a young black co-pilot facing bias, defiance, and skepticism, asserting control over an entire flight crew. History was being written in real time, and few aboard would ever forget the moment. Jasmine's gaze swept the cabin briefly. She could feel the subtle shifts in posture, the hesitant nods, the compliance that had replaced resistance. Authority had been claimed, but she knew the true test of leadership was not in asserting power. It was in maintaining it, ensuring safety and guiding everyone forward under pressure. Olivia exhaled slowly, tension radiating from her but quieting just enough to acknowledge a hard truth. Jasmine Monroe was fully competent, fully in command, and fully capable of keeping Flight 612 safe. Pride warred with reason, but deep down, she understood that this young woman had achieved something extraordinary. Jasmine adjusted the yoke, making slight corrections as the plane leveled at cruising altitude. The hum of the engines was steady, the instruments precise. Every passenger, crew member, and even the ghost of doubt lingering in the cockpit was now under her authority. She had transformed tension into operational compliance, defiance into obedience, and chaos into calm. And yet the emotional weight of the moment lingered. She had fired the crew, decades of experience, knowledge, and seniority, because authority had been challenged. She had made a decision that few could have imagined, balancing professional responsibility with moral courage. Every action she had taken had been necessary, and every outcome rested on her ability to maintain control under pressure. The plane hummed along its route, climbing steadily, the horizon brightening as morning light spilled across the fuselage. Jasmine's hands remained steady on the controls, her eyes scanning the instruments, every breath measured, every movement deliberate. She had claimed authority, enforced compliance, and asserted leadership in a way that left no room for argument, resistance, or doubt. Suspense. Even with the crew removed and authority established, could Jasmine maintain control under the immense pressure of the flight, with passengers unaware of the historic power struggle that had just unfolded? And what consequences awaited her once Flight 612 landed? Flight 612, leveled at cruising altitude, the roar of the engines now a steady hum beneath Jasmine Monroe's calm control. The sky outside was a brilliant blue, sunlight glinting across the wings, casting long reflections over the fuselage. Yet inside the cockpit, tension remained taut, a living, breathing entity that refused to dissipate. Every eye on the crew and every heartbeat was focused on her. Jasmine had claimed authority, fired the resistant crew, and maintained operational control, but she knew the real test was only beginning. Captain Olivia Sanders sat rigidly in the co-pilot seat, arms folded, eyes forward. Her jaw was set, her pride still simmering, but her posture had softened, a reluctant acknowledgement of Jasmine's competence. She hadn't spoken since the firing, but Jasmine could feel the unspoken evaluation radiating from her, the silent measure of skill, judgment, and authority. The veteran pilot, now relegated to an observer role, lingered near the cockpit doorway, muttering quietly under his breath. I've never seen anything like this," he said, voice low, almost incredulous. A co-pilot commanding a flight, firing the crew midair and still holding control. Jasmine didn't respond. She let him stew, knowing that authority was shown through action, not words. The remaining flight attendants, though shaken by the unprecedented events, moved with precise efficiency under Jasmine's direction. Their movements had transformed from hesitant to deliberate, a testament to her calm, commanding presence. Overhead bins were secured, passengers' seatbelts checked, and the cabin exuded a quiet professionalism that had been absent just minutes ago. Jasmine exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of the plane's hum anchor her focus. She had trained for this moment, situations where bias, defiance, and disbelief collided with responsibility. Every decision, every movement, every word mattered. One misstep could unravel the fragile control she had established, but her preparation and discipline held her steady. Through the cabin intercom, she addressed the passengers. Her voice was calm, professional, and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Monroe. We are at cruising altitude and all systems are functioning normally. Thank you for your attention, and please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Her words were measured, authoritative, and carried a quiet assurance that belied the turmoil that had just unfolded. Olivia's gaze flicked toward Jasmine, her expression a mixture of awe, disbelief, and begrudging respect. She had trained countless pilots, faced turbulence that could have unseated lesser aviators, and commanded authority over every conceivable situation. And yet here she was, witnessing someone younger, less experienced in years, fully commanding the flight with precision, calm, and undeniable authority. Pride warred with reason, but she could not deny what was happening. The veteran pilot whispered again, voice barely audible. She's actually handling this flawlessly." Jasmine didn't react, her eyes scanning instruments, adjusting minor corrections, maintaining altitude, speed, and heading with meticulous care. The cockpit was a symphony of control, her calm authority the conductor, orchestrating precision from crew and machine alike. Below, passengers shifted in their seats, some noticing the unusual energy, others blissfully unaware of the historic assertion of authority that had just occurred. Phones were discreetly raised, some recording, some simply observing in awe. No one aboard could have anticipated the magnitude of the shift in command. An entire crew's loyalty and compliance realigned in a matter of minutes. Jasmine's mind, however, remained focused on the technical aspects of flight. Altitude, heading, airspeed, fuel consumption, all were monitored with exacting precision. She adjusted the trim, verified navigation systems, and scanned weather patterns ahead. Everything was within operational parameters, yet her mind remained acutely aware of the human element, the lingering tension, the unsaid judgments, and the subtle undercurrent of skepticism that still hung in the cabin. Olivia cleared her throat, breaking the silence for the first time since the firing. "You've handled this well," she admitted, voice low, tinged with reluctant respect. "I still don't agree with everything you did, but you've proven your capability." Jasmine allowed a small nod, maintaining eye contact with the instrument panel. "Thank you, Captain Sanders. My priority is the safety of this aircraft and all passengers aboard. Everything else is secondary." Her voice was calm, professional, and unyielding, an affirmation that authority had shifted, but responsibility remained shared. The veteran pilot muttered again, a trace of awe in his tone. She's changed the game." Jasmine ignored him, knowing that authority is cemented through competence and consistency, not validation. She remained vigilant, scanning the instruments, monitoring the environment, and maintaining control with surgical precision. A turbulence alert briefly flickered on the navigation display. Jasmine's hands adjusted the yoke smoothly, compensating for minor shifts in altitude. "Nothing to worry about, folks," she announced calmly over the intercom, voice steady and reassuring. "Just minor air currents. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The passengers murmured in relief, unaware that they were witnessing not just a pilot managing turbulence, but a masterclass in leadership under unprecedented pressure. Olivia exhaled quietly, a subtle acknowledgement passing through her eyes. She had been a captain for decades, faced emergencies that tested every ounce of skill and nerve, and yet she could not help but recognize Jasmine Monroe's exceptional ability to maintain composure and authority. Her pride still simmered, but begrudging respect had begun to take root. The veteran pilot shifted uncomfortably, muttering under his breath, "I've seen a lot in my career, but never anyone like her. She's unstoppable." Jasmine, focused and unwavering, allowed the words to wash over her. Recognition was unnecessary. Competence spoke louder than praise ever could. Below, the flight attendants continued their rounds, now operating with renewed confidence and precision under Jasmine's guidance. The cabin exuded an almost surreal calm, passengers unaware of the storm that had unfolded behind the cockpit curtain. Phones recorded, whispers circulated, but the transformation of authority remained invisible to all but the trained eyes and ears who understood the dynamics of flight leadership. As the plane leveled and the flight progressed, Jasmine allowed herself a brief glance at Olivia. The captain's eyes met hers, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a recognition that authority had shifted, that courage and competence had prevailed over bias and defiance. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't need to. The acknowledgement itself was enough. Yet even as control was established, Jasmine remained vigilant. This was only the beginning. The flight was not over and the stakes remained high. Passengers were still aboard, a crew had been fired, and the tension, though subdued, still pulsed like an invisible current through the plane. Every decision, every command, every adjustment could determine the outcome of this historic flight. The hum of the engines, the steady rise and fall of the plane, and the subtle vibrations through the fuselage were reminders that Flight 612 was in motion, alive with potential energy, and entirely under Jasmine's command. She had claimed authority, enforced compliance, and demonstrated courage, skill, and professionalism in a situation few could have imagined. Suspense. Flight 612 was now under Jasmine's command, but could she maintain authority and composure under the pressures of the flight, and what consequences awaited once the plane prepared to land? The sun was beginning its descent as Flight 612 approached its destination. The city skyline shimmered through the cockpit windows, streets glinting like veins of gold beneath the late afternoon light. Jasmine Monroe's hands rested lightly on the yoke, scanning instruments with meticulous precision. The plane hummed under her control, perfectly level, every gauge within operational norms. The passengers were largely oblivious to the tension that had defined the flight from takeoff to cruising altitude. They trusted what they couldn't see, unaware of the historic authority Jasmine had asserted. Captain Olivia Sanders remained in the co-pilot seat, silent, her posture rigid yet subtly acknowledging Jasmine's authority. Her pride was bruised, but grudging respect had begun to settle in, a recognition that Jasmine had navigated a storm of bias, defiance, and human ego, all while keeping the plane, crew, and passengers safe. For decades, Olivia had believed authority was inseparable from experience, but now she had seen firsthand that skill, courage, and integrity could override prejudice. The veteran pilot lingered near the rear of the cockpit, muttering quietly, I don't know what to say, she's incredible." His disbelief had evolved into awe, though he remained cautious, aware of the historic implications of this flight. Jasmine didn't respond. She had no need for praise. Her focus remained entirely on the safe landing of the aircraft. Competence, after all, was its own reward. Below, the remaining flight attendants moved with quiet precision, following Jasmine's directives flawlessly. They had once hesitated, some openly skeptical of a young co-pilot asserting authority mid-flight. But under her calm, unwavering command, hesitation had been replaced with confidence, skepticism with compliance. The cabin exuded a quiet professionalism, passengers adjusting in their seats, some reading, some gazing out windows, entirely unaware of the intense drama that had unfolded. Jasmine's voice came over the intercom, calm and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into the airport. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, seats upright, and all personal belongings secured. Flight attendants, confirm cabin readiness." Responses crackled back in the background, efficient, precise. The remaining crew had adapted fully to Jasmine's leadership, executing tasks with methodical professionalism. Even Olivia moved with restrained efficiency, following protocol despite the storm of pride and disbelief still churning inside her. Jasmine's eyes flicked briefly toward her co-pilot, noting every subtle movement, every trace of tension and acknowledgement. "Captain Sanders," she said quietly but firmly, "thank you for following protocol. Your cooperation ensures the safety of all passengers." Olivia exhaled slowly, her shoulders sagging just enough to reveal the tension beneath. "You handled this well, Monroe. Exceptionally well," she admitted, voice tight but sincere. Pride warred with recognition, but the words were real. For the first time, Olivia Sanders had witnessed authority asserted not through seniority or ego, but through calm decisiveness and unwavering integrity. The veteran pilot's voice trembled slightly. I've never seen anything like this. You've changed the game." Jasmine allowed a small nod, her attention returning to the instruments. Competence spoke louder than praise ever could, and she had more work ahead. Precision, safety, and execution remained paramount. As the plane descended, turbulence shook the fuselage slightly, a minor air current that would have caused hesitation in a less confident crew. Jasmine adjusted the yoke smoothly, compensating for the minor shifts, maintaining altitude and trajectory with exacting precision. Her calm, steady hands reassured the remaining crew, passengers, and even the veteran pilot, who now watched with an awed sense of respect. "Cabin secure," Jasmine announced over the intercom, voice confident, measured. Passengers seated, seatbelts fastened, cabin prepared for landing. Flight attendants confirmed, their professionalism now fully aligned with her authority. The transformation from hesitation to compliance had been complete, and the final test, landing, was now underway. The runway stretched ahead, lights twinkling as the aircraft approached. Jasmine adjusted the throttle, managing speed, altitude, and descent angle with meticulous care. The city below glimmered, streets reflecting the fading sunlight, a visual reminder of the human stakes aboard this aircraft. Every decision mattered. Every adjustment had consequences. Failure was not an option. Olivia remained silent, observing the young co-pilot's calm, methodical precision. She had seen pilots handle emergencies, weather, and mechanical failures, but she had never witnessed authority asserted in this way, a combination of skill, integrity, and quiet courage that demanded compliance without coercion. Her respect, begrudging but real, had solidified. Jasmine had earned it. The veteran pilot whispered again, voice low, "She's flawless." Jasmine allowed the words to wash over her, though she did not respond. Validation was unnecessary. Results spoke louder than any accolades could. The aircraft aligned perfectly with the runway, its descent smooth, controlled, precise. "Landing gear deployed," Jasmine announced calmly. "Flaps set, speed optimal, we are ready for touchdown." Her hands guided the plane with steady assurance, every movement calculated, every adjustment purposeful. The runway approached rapidly, lights converging ahead. The wheels touched down with a controlled thump, and Jasmine maintained the glide path with exacting precision. The passengers, many still unaware of the full drama, felt only the smooth descent, some murmuring quietly at the seamless landing. The remaining crew followed her lead, executing taxi procedures flawlessly. Once the plane slowed and reached the gate, Jasmine engaged the parking brake, powered down systems, and performed the final shutdown checks. The cabin lights brightened, signaling the end of the journey. Passengers stirred, stretching, some still filming, others whispering about the unusual calm and competence they had sensed but could not fully understand. Jasmine turned to the remaining crew. "This concludes our flight. Thank you for complying with operational protocol and ensuring the safety of all aboard." Her voice carried authority, respect, and acknowledgement. Even the skeptical veteran pilot nodded, a trace of awe and humility in his expression. Olivia exhaled, tension slowly leaving her shoulders. "You did it," she said softly, a mixture of pride, respect, and lingering disbelief. "You handled everything flawlessly. I underestimated you, Monroe." Jasmine allowed herself a small, controlled smile. "Experience is valuable, Captain Sanders, but courage, integrity, and adherence to procedure are just as important. Thank you for your cooperation." Passengers began disembarking, oblivious to the historic power shift and authority assertion that had unfolded at 30,000 feet. Phones buzzed, whispers circulated, and some crew members quietly marveled at the precision and calm leadership they had witnessed. For Jasmine, the victory was silent, professional, and total. Authority had been asserted, compliance achieved, and safety maintained. Outside the terminal, ground crew moved efficiently, unaware of the drama they were witnessing through the cockpit windows. Jasmine guided the aircraft to the gate, executed the final shutdown, and secured systems. Every motion was precise, measured, and professional, a final testament to her calm, decisive authority. Suspense and closure. Jasmine Monroe had faced prejudice, defiance, and skepticism, and she had emerged victorious. She had fired the crew, asserted authority, and maintained complete control of Flight 612. But beyond the landing, the consequences awaited. Airline operations would review the incident, reputations had shifted, and history had been made. Would Jasmine's decisive action be lauded as courage and leadership, or condemned as overreach? One thing was certain: no one aboard Flight 612, or in the airline industry, would ever forget the young co-pilot who refused to yield.